Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to our very first CLF Australia webinar. We're very excited that you are here to join us this evening or at a different time zone, depending on where you're joining from the world. And it's a great session tonight. We're actually here to share some news about what's going on in the CLF and concussion CTE space, as well as an opportunity to meet some of our amazing directors and their roles with CLF Australia. My name's Annitta Siliato, and I'm the Executive Director for the Concussion Foundation, Legacy Foundation Australia. And, I guess tonight's session is really to share more around since our launch. We launched last year in September. And just to reiterate on our aims, obviously, we want to raise more awareness and shift the culture in concussion and sport and CTE. We're also wanting to look at ways that we can offer more support. And that support might be through our CLF helpline that we're really hoping to grow and be available for those people that need extra support, need guidance, and so on. And finally, we'd also like to find ways to raise money for more research in the space. So thank you, everyone. It's a great pleasure to see you all here this evening, and we hope that you will enjoy what we have to offer. We are going to run a series of webinars throughout this whole year. So there's going to be some really exciting ones up. We're going to have some specialised webinars on AFL, NRL, women's sports, international sports. So please keep an eye out on your emails for those exciting webinars that are coming up. And it's a great way for us to learn what's going on in this space, as well as grow our community in this area. Today, we are really honoured to have some amazing guests. We have Professor Alan Pearce, who's coming along to talk to us, one of the leading concussion experts in the world. We also have Professor Michael Buckland, who is a neuropathologist and again, a leading expert in his field, and the amazing Jamie Shine, who is an expert in the legal area. So they're going to share some great information about what they're doing in that space and why they're part of CLF Australia. We will conduct the webinar where we will have some presentations from each of the members tonight. And then at the end, we're going to have a Q&A. So we'll open it up for Q&A. Perhaps you've got a question or two that you might want to ask, and we can follow that up. The session's also recorded. So if you do miss out, don't worry about that. You have an opportunity to watch it. It will be sent to your email. These are our social medias, guys. We have a number of CLF Australia and CLF social media platforms. You can join us on LinkedIn, on Facebook. We also have Twitter and obviously Instagram. So there's a lot happening in that space, and we're really starting to grow that. So please join those platforms, and we can grow our community further. Okay, first of all, I'd like to now introduce you to Professor Alan Pearce. Now, Professor Alan Pearce is an amazing person, and he certainly has a passion for this area. He is one of our directors at CLFA, as well as a director at the Australian Sports Brain Bank in Victoria. Alan Pearce is regarded and known internationally for his studies, and also he focuses on the physiological techniques to quantify physiological biomarkers following a concussion, as well as using his techniques to measure chronic manifestations of repeated concussions associated on neurological impairment. I know that sounds quite deep, but I think we'll hand it over to Alan now to share with us, okay, why did you become a director at CLF Australia? What is your connection and what is your role here? Thank you, Alan.
Hi, Anita. Hi, everyone. Why not? That's what I say. Why not? I think that's more the answer. Look, I think it's something that I've been passionate about for nearly 15 years now, and part of that passion has been about the science, but I've also become a bit of a reluctant advocate in this space, because we've really needed to create a greater awareness about the issue of not just concussion, but the long-term effects of repetitive brain trauma, and CTE in particular. So, Michael Buckland will sort of talk a little bit more about that in the story that we have tonight. But I guess it's something that I've always been passionate about, and to be able to channel some of this energy into the Concussion Legacy Foundation and starting up the Concussion Legacy Foundation here in Australia as a chapter of the international group has been, something that we've wanted to get started here for a really long time. So it's been great to be able to help get the brand of CLF to Australia, and I guess give a little bit more awareness and support for not just research, but also for advocacy, support for players, athletes themselves, but their families, friends. So it's more than just the athlete. It's the entire sphere of what this is about.
Sounds amazing. And I know that I've known you now for a couple of years, and I've really seen a lot of the work that you do. And it truly does make a significant difference to this community. And so many people speak so highly of you, and I can see why. Alan, there's been so much happening in this space of late, a lot in the media, Senate inquiries, it's all kind of starting to, more information is coming out for the community. Can you share any of the latest research that you're aware of, or, what's happening at the moment, and what do you like the future to see, or what would you like to see in the future?
Yeah, that's a pretty big question, pretty broad question, isn't it, really? Yeah, I guess there's a number of areas that we have to deal with as we're getting more awareness around, well, I guess a concussion, but also I think we also have to be cognizant of neurodegenerative diseases as well, like CTE. And again, I don't want to sort of rain on Michael's parade too much, but I think one of the things that we do need to understand on a wider scale is that the long-term outcomes and the issue of CTE is not just a concussion issue. And so we need to be able to acknowledge that they're overlapping, but they're also two separate things. And so, I focus here on the concussion side of things, and I obviously collaborate with Michael and Kath Suter and Andrew Affleck at the Brain Bank as well. But in terms of concussion, we're now starting to acknowledge in our sports that we do need to take this injury really serious, much more seriously than what we have even probably 5 or 6 years ago. We do need to understand what the short and long-term outcomes are of concussion. So things like, how long should we be resting players? What sort of rest should we be giving them? Should it be more active based, or moving beyond the darkened room type of situation? We need to address how many concussions is too many. For example, it's an individual issue. We need to have better ways of measuring and becoming more precise in our measurements for the individual, rather than just generalizing the data. We need to understand male and female differences, children and adolescents versus adults, sociological, cultural, historical aspects of this injury as well. So, there's a lot in this space more than just the clinical aspects of concussion. So, I could talk all day, but I know that other people need to be involved as well. So I'll probably just stop there.
Yeah, there is just so much to cover, and there's so much work to be done. And I think, there's a lot more that we need to learn and research and find out. But I think they're all very important aspects of what we're doing here. So thank you very much, Alan, for that very amazing sort of information sharing there. Okay, we're now going to introduce you to another amazing person. We're so lucky at CLF Australia to have these wonderful people on our board. Jamie Shine is the General Manager of Head Trauma at Shine Lawyers, and also is one of our board members. And she's very much involved in advocating for clients, particularly with traumatic brain injuries, and helping them to obtain access to rehabilitation, treatment and compensation. And Jamie, I can imagine that this role is, can be quite challenging at times, but also quite rewarding. I guess our first question is, why did you join the board, Jamie? And what, I know that you have such a passion in this area. So can you please share with us your thoughts and ideas in this space? Thank you.
Sure. Firstly, I hope you can hear me all right. I've had some computer difficulties starting off tonight. Excellent. So why I became involved in CLF Australia is, so by way of background, I'm a personal injury lawyer, and for over 2 decades, I've been working in the catastrophic injury space, so helping a lot of people who have been suffering, particularly with traumatic brain injuries. And it was through that work that I started to come across a lot of individuals who were having a lot of problems, but which were very similar to some of my clients with the moderate traumatic brain injuries. But these individuals, despite their symptoms, weren't getting diagnosed, and they were confused and frustrated. And not only were they having to deal with this constellation of symptoms, but they were also struggling to find support. And it started, it led to Shine Lawyers setting up a traumatic brain injury team, which I lead, which tries to help people with mild traumatic brain injuries, post-concussion syndrome, where there's ongoing problems, all the way to the severe traumatic brain injuries. But the reason why I became involved with CLF is because it became very apparent very early that these individuals didn't have a voice. So there wasn't a lot of diagnosis, definitely not a lot of treatment or treatment options available for individuals. And so I realized that there was a need for advocacy and awareness in this space. And I started looking overseas and researching as much as I could about post-concussion syndrome, concussion, and mild traumatic brain injury. So in the hope that I could find experts and treatment providers that could help my clients. And it was through my research of international leaders and experts that I came across some experts in our own backyard, which is Dr. Alan Pearce and Dr. Michael Buckland. And through connecting with them and trying to basically absorb like a sponge all of the information that they have, it led to finding out more about the Concussion Legacy Foundation's work in the US and other countries. And it was definitely something I was passionate about in terms of the need for awareness, for education, for research, and for support. The more we know, obviously, the more that we can help. And that's not only in concussion in contact sports and sport-related concussions, but also through to those progressive brain injuries, which are the CTE, which my fellow board members know so much about.
Yeah, all such really important work. And what I love about that is that you're not only there as the lawyer, but you're there for support. And I think that's just a wonderful sort of way to approach this. Jamie, there's been so much happening in this space from a legal perspective. There's so much going on, and we've heard it all in the media. So perhaps if you could share with us, what is the latest legal sort of, what are the latest legal matters or areas, and what would you like to see in the future, or what do you think is going to happen in the future in this space? Thanks.
Yeah, so Australia has gone from being pretty inactive or very little movement when it comes to commencing any cases for sports-related brain injuries. We've seen a handful of individual cases in the past, but that's about it. And there's particular reasons why those claims haven't been brought in the past. However, this year, we've started to see some action. We saw in March this year some class actions and individual actions being lodged in the Victorian jurisdiction, and so it will be interesting to see how that plays out. Internationally, we've obviously got, the state-based class action is against the AFL, so against that body, and then other than that, we haven't seen too much against the other bodies in Australia. We do see the class action that has been commenced over in the UK against World Rugby, so that's another one that we're watching to see what arguments will be led in that litigation. I think the reason why we're starting to see more litigation is because it's really the only option left available to individuals. So they're suffering, they're feeling unheard. Brain injuries are very significant injuries, and so when they can't get help or change, the only way they can affect the practice and policies and the way we handle these things is to bring claims. So the thing I'm probably interested in most is obviously watching these cases and claims and see how they play out, but I'm probably more interested in the short term in terms of the outcome of the recent Senate inquiry into sports-related concussions and repeat head injuries. So to see what the government has to say in relation to their national sittings and what recommendations they come out of that, because whilst the litigation on foot is it relates mainly to professionals, and where I see there is a gap there is in relation to the rest of us, the amateurs that are out there playing, what options are available for us in terms of treatment, care and support, and where will we get that funding for that? So that's probably something I'm very interested in, is the outcome and recommendations from the inquiry, and then obviously watching if our sporting codes or the peak sporting bodies aren't changing their ways and implementing policies, then yeah, we will see more litigation.
Yeah, some really valid points there. And I think, it will be interesting to see what comes out of the Senate inquiry, because it may shift or change what's happening in the space. And you make a really relevant point with amateur sports. Like you said, they're mainly professionals. So yeah, what about those that have played at that grassroots level, and where does that leave them? So great. Thank you so much, Jamie, for sharing that. You truly are inspirational, and really enjoyed listening to your comments and presentation. Okay, we're going to now head to our final speaker. And I'd like to introduce now Professor Michael Buckland, who is the Executive Director for the Australian Sports Brain Bank. And is the Senior Neuropathologist and Head of the Department of Neuropathology at the Royal Prince Alfred Hospital. And I know, Michael, you have a number of other roles and duties. You're very, very busy, and I love your library in the background there. But yeah, it would be great for us to learn a little bit more about how you became involved with CLF Australia, and how do you see your role in this space? Thank you. Over to you, Michael.
Thanks, Anita. To be honest, I actually just sort of stumbled into this space out of an intellectual curiosity. As someone that looks at a lot of autopsy brains every week, including lots of weird and wonderful dementias, I had been following what had been coming out of the US and the Boston University CTE Centre, and always puzzled me that I never see that. I see lots of Alzheimer's disease and frontotemporal dementia and so forth, but I never see the sort of pathology that they're publishing on. And then I realised that I wasn't actually really looking at the most at-risk population. I'd never seen a professional footy player's brain before. So I tried to find one. It was not easy, and eventually I did. And it actually, the first case I looked at, there was CTE, something I'd never seen before. And I've been doing this job for 14 or 15 years now, and would see between 100 and 150 brains a year. And so it was, we early on realised that the way we're going to actually attract these sorts of donations is by setting up a brain bank where people could contact us, and we had ethics approval to look at people's brains at autopsy. And a friend of mine introduced me to Dr. Chris Nowinski from the Concussion Legacy Foundation in the USA. And with his help, he was a fantastic help in sort of rapidly setting up the Australian Sports Brain Bank. And since then, it's been a bit of a wild ride. It became very evident very early on that while it's great to look at people's brains, the issue was much, much larger than that. And certainly the issue was larger than I could deal with, and particularly as a pathologist, rather than someone that sees living patients. Hence, I was very excited about being able to be on the board of Concussion Legacy Foundation Australia, because I really see CLF Australia as being able to assist with all those things I can't personally assist with, such as finding help for people that need it during life, supporting families and people with information, referral pathways, as you've said, as well as an advocacy role. I early on realised that as I'm an employee of RPA, I'm essentially a public servant, and there are quite strict rules about what I can and what I can't say in public because of my public service employment. So having an independent advocacy organisation that is able to speak without fear or favour and speak the truth is also another incredibly valuable role for CLF Australia. So I guess that's why I'm here.
Thanks so much, Michael. And I'm always fascinated when you talk. And I just remember you telling me once that the first time you actually saw a brain with CTE, what was your feeling when that happened? Can you talk me through, talk us through what that was like when you actually saw that?
Well, it was very exciting, and also a bit. I was a bit dumbfounded as well, because the first time I looked at a professional rugby player's brain, there it was. It was not easy. It was not hard to find. And I realised then that, in fact, all my training and all my understanding of degenerative brain diseases and the way you approach them at autopsy was such that we would have been missing the vast majority of cases of CTE. So maybe others have passed through my hands before, and I never realised because I never took the right approach to be able to see the lesions. It was also slightly disconcerting that it was so easy to find once I started to look in that at-risk population. I mean, having said that, we finished the examination of over 50 brains now with the Sports Brain Bank, and about half of them have CTE. They're obviously donated by people or their families that have a lot of concerns about it. So it's not surprising we're getting such a high hit rate, but it is also slightly disturbing. It's not just something that might be limited to one or two professional players. We're seeing it in professionals as well as people that never played at the professional level. So yeah, quite a remarkable moment that sticks in my memory. And in fact, that case it sort of almost coincided with the launch of the Australian Sports Brain Bank.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I think there's a lot happening in that space. Like you said, you found CTE in quite a few more brains. So can you just share with us, what is the latest situation at the brain bank? How many pledges have we got? And what is your latest findings and research in terms of the brain space? I know that I came into the brain bank. Michael, thank you. It was amazing to see the work that you and your team actually does there. But perhaps if you could just share with us what the latest research is, or just some of the findings that you're having at the moment.
Yeah, as I said, we've actually got over 900 people that have now registered their interest in donating their brain from across Australia. We have successfully retrieved 74 or 75 brains now, again from across Australia. So it's quite a busy job, because the legislation around brain donation, it's different to organ donation, where you sign your driver's license or register for organ donation. That's a different set of laws, and the donation for research is covered by a different act, and it's different from state to state. So we've had to interact with, every state-based Human Tissue Act, which are all with their own sort of idiosyncrasies. And I'm incredibly lucky that I have very wonderful colleagues in forensics and in autopsy pathology across the country, and they all get it. It's not like there's any argument, like you would, the jury's out or anything like that. It's all so obvious to my colleagues, and they just want to help. So we've been able to retrieve brains from every state except for Tasmania so far, and it's only because we haven't been asked to do it yet. As I said, it's still sitting at about 50% CTE rate. Disturbingly, about 50% of those with CTE have come to us because they died from suicide. And that's an association that has stayed constant throughout our work. People will still argue over causation, but it is certainly something that we're trying to dig into more to try and find what's going on in these people that end up taking their life. We've been able now as well to start some work on the donated tissue. So not just issuing a report, a diagnostic report, and saying this person had CTE, or this person had Alzheimer's disease, or this person had nothing at all. We're now starting to use some of the donated tissue on some very sort of high-end molecular biology research, with the idea that if we can find out what unique molecules are there in CTE compared to, say, Alzheimer's disease, then we can start to go hunting for them in the blood or the spinal fluid, and potentially find reliable markers for CTE that will allow for a diagnosis during life. And of course, once we sort of dissect the molecular pathways underlying CTE, then that's the first step towards designing a treatment for it, a targeted treatment. So it's been really exciting just in this year that we've had the opportunity to be able to start this molecular research on the tissue.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael, for sharing. And it sounds like, again, it's growing quite rapidly, and the work that you are undertaking is so important in making a difference. And thank you to those that are putting comments in the chat around the fantastic work that each of you are doing. But thank you, Michael, for sharing what's happening there in the brain bank. All right, guys, we are going to now open up to Q&A. And we've already got some questions coming in. So I will start by reading out a couple of questions. So please feel free to sort of comment. So we've got one from Chris. Hi, Chris. I hope you're well. He's played a lot of rugby league and has done boxing all his life. He's not sure how many times he's been concussed. Should he see a doctor to get a brain scan to see what trauma I've had? My family and myself have noticed changes in myself. So any advice for Chris?
Well, I could start.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
Look, I think if there are concerns, definitely worthwhile getting checked out, because there are lots of, because CTE signs and symptoms are quite non-specific, and there are lots of other causes for those signs and symptoms. It's really important to get checked out, and it may well be that there is something very treatable that
Perhaps he's frozen there. You might come back on. Okay. Can you hear me, guys? Yes? Yep. Okay. So, Chris, yep. Michael, I hope will come back in. Oh, he's back.
Sorry, I think that's my fault.
That's okay.
But yeah, there are treatable conditions, so definitely get checked out.
Yeah. And also, Chris, I mean, feel free to reach out to us. Not sure where you're located, but we might be able to refer you on to some specialists in that area. That would be helpful. So thank you very much, Chris. Did anyone else have anything there? I'll move to the next question. Okay. Next question is, how is CLF planning on fundraising? What research will you support with those funds? So yeah, maybe Al, that might be a question for you. What do you see if we get some more funding in? What sort of research do you see we can do?
Well, I guess, we're trying to, look towards markers for concussion in terms of return to play, that we can understand when someone has been concussed in sport and, when is the right time for them to come back. So we can look at that. As Michael was saying before, we need to do a lot of research in the area of understanding some of the markers of CTE so that we can look at trying to get, oh, hello, got the dog. So we got, markers for CTE that we can then look towards treatment as well. But as I sort of said before as well, we need to look beyond just the medical scientific and look at the socio-cultural, historical aspects of this issue as well, because looking back can also help us look forward. So I think, we've got a lot of work ahead of us.
Great, thanks. There certainly is a lot of work, and I think there's not really much research in Australia, so I think it's sort of an area that we really need to focus on and expand as much as we can. Another attendee, how are you planning on raising awareness on concussion? So, I mean, I guess, what we have been doing at CLF is we have been visiting the sporting clubs, and Alan is presenting. We have also a few other people around Australia who are visiting the clubs and raising awareness around concussion and sport. But there's certainly a lot more that we can do. Did anyone else want to comment on that one?
Did you want to talk about the triathlon coming up?
Yeah, okay. We have got a triathlon coming up in Adelaide in November. And that one is a major event to sort of raise awareness about concussion. It's led by a former SANFL player, Luke Ivans, and he's actually has that triathlon sponsored by the whole league. So that's a great way to raise awareness by having the sporting codes involved in the promotion of an event to raise money to hopefully also kind of look at education and raising that necessary awareness as well. So Jane, did you have anything else for that?
Yeah, I was just going to say on top of that, I mean, we're a small board and we need everyone's help. So it is important that as a community, we grow our community and that we share that information and knowledge. And CLF has some amazing resources already available because they've already been doing it in the US, in Canada. You know, they've got so much by way of resources. The podcast, for instance, that has been shared gives really good insight from the different symptoms. But so I would say one thing that we can all do from today is to share that information on social media and make our voice greater, so that, you know, that there is that public awareness, because I am shocked by the number of people who still don't know about concussion, or they're letting kids continue to play on the fields when it's obvious to a lawyer, you know, let alone those monitoring the game, that there's something wrong. So I think the starting point is for us to all be a part of the solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I really relate to that comment that there is so much work to be done. There are so many people that really do not know enough about the risks of concussion, particularly for juniors. So thank you so much. All right, we're going to Dr. Sylvia Greta-Bagoose. Her question: not much is known about how a person acquires Parkinson's disease, the neurological illness. My husband played a lot of sports, soccer, as a young person. What do you know about brain injuries and Parkinson's? Could there be a connection?
I can start probably, and then Michael can add on as well. We do know that there are links between repetitive head trauma from heading of soccer for a number of neurodegenerative diseases, including Parkinson's, but motor neuron disease, Alzheimer's, and dementia. And a lot of this work has actually come from Scotland, from Willie Stewart's group, and he's got the field study, which is the football influence on lifelong health and dementia risk, and they in 2019 brought out an epidemiological paper that showed that there was a 3 to 5 times risk, increased risk in soccer players, professional soccer players, against the general population for these neurodegenerative diseases. So it's something that we do know for quite some time, and we can go right back to 1928 and the famous paper called Punch Drunk on the links between repetitive head trauma and pathology to the brain. So, Michael, you want to add on?
Yes. So one of the big concepts we have to try and get across is that, people talk about that CTE can only be diagnosed at autopsy. It's actually, technically it's the same for all degenerative brain diseases. So Parkinson's disease to a neurologist is not necessarily what correlates with what a pathologist would call Parkinson's disease under the microscope. And sometimes there are other pathologies when you look at it under the microscope. Having said that, there does seem to be an increased risk of of a variety of neurodegenerative diseases after exposure to repetitive head impacts. Whether or not they cause it, causation is a very, very vexed issue when it comes to diseases that occur commonly in the community anyhow. So it's sort of a bit of an open question, that one.
Okay. Seems like he's frozen again. Look, we might move on. There's quite a few questions coming in, so thank you for sending them in. Kirsty, do you have brain donations from non-sports people with no history of concussions, and have any of them shown CTE? So
I'm going to stop my video.
Okay.
So hopefully it won't freeze as much. Yes, so we now screen all the brains that come through RPA neuropathology for CTE, and we published a paper last year in a neuropathology journal with the results of the first, I think it was 160 or so routine cases that had been screened. And we did find 4 that one of that hadn't been donated to the brain bank. One had actually, as it turns out, had been a very, very keen boxer. 2 of them had very bad epilepsy with lots and lots of grand mal seizures over many years. Although the notes we had didn't say they'd hit their head a lot, if anyone's seen a big grand mal seizure, and you imagine having 6 of those a day for 20 years, you can understand that, you know, conceptually, they probably had been exposed to repetitive head impacts. And the last one was someone that had had brain surgery with complications that required the insertion of multiple shunts over a period of time. So once again, it was exposure to a repeated brain trauma, very different sort of brain trauma to, say, playing contact sports. But it seems that that of the cases we found, they all had a plausible mechanism of repetitive head impact. Of those cases we screened, there were a very large number, I think it might have been 60 of the 160, had a history of drug or alcohol abuse, and there was no correlation. So if someone says you can't blame drugs and alcohol for CTE, it's just not, there's no data to support that. So yeah, it probably does occur in the community at much lower rates in people that for whatever reason are exposed to repetitive head impacts, including a couple of cases of females that had been exposed to a long period of intimate partner violence. So definitely, it's not just a contact sports problem.
Yeah, it does touch across a lot of different spaces. Thank you very much, Michael. Just moving along, there's still quite a few more questions. We'll see how many we can get through, but this one's from Stephen. He'd like to say thank you to all of you for being so informative. And given that you all three have been witnesses at the recent Australian Senate inquiry, can you speak to their hopes and expectations for that inquiry? So, who would like to take that one on?
I have a feeling that Stephen might have actually been in the inquiry himself.
Okay.
Maybe we can throw the question back to Stephen.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
I think from my perspective, there's a number of different headings. So I think it was good in terms of the inquiry itself has created awareness, which I think was like as basic as that sounds. I think that was a starting point that we actually needed. I would like to see education and consistency across Australia so that people aren't as confused about, well, what resources and where do we go? And you know, everyone's singing from the same hymn sheet, to use the cliche. But also I'd love to see direction in terms of research and funding, and I would love to see direction in terms of treatment options, legal frameworks that might actually work for everybody. So I'm really hoping that we'll get some guidance about the future to make sport in Australia a little bit safer, and that those who are injured actually feel supported and looked after.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was part of the inquiry as well, and really more from the lived experiences panel. And I have to say that the senators and the ministers were very touched by what we had to say, and you know, we're hopeful that that might have an impact for what happens after the inquiry is released. But okay, moving on. What should junior organisations be putting in place to reduce the risk of concussion? A big question, but over to you guys.
Yeah, it is a big question, isn't it? I think from my perspective, we need to create a better awareness and culture change around this issue. Just in the short term, I think the long term, you know, we can talk. It's probably a bigger discussion than what we've got time for tonight. But at least in the short term, we are seeing a lot of, I guess, you know, kids playing through concussion because there's, you know, not enough awareness about it. There's also, dare I say, some parents that live vicariously through their kids and want to push them back through too early. And if we can sort of change the attitude towards this injury, that it's not a badge of honor, it's not to show weak. You're not showing weakness because you've got a headache or you're feeling dizzy or nauseous. You know, there's a lot of things that we can do from a cultural change perspective, because they do watch, you know, kids sport. You know, they're obviously watching their heroes every weekend in NRL, AFL, A-League soccer, you name it. Netball, there's been some issues in netball in the last few weeks that, you know, I've been speaking up about, not doing enough in terms of head injury assessments and returning players back on too quickly, which then translates to what happens in you know, on the weekends. And so I think we need to at least address that this is a serious injury that needs to be given the respect that it deserves, and then look at more, I guess, you know, bigger issues down the track.
Yep, great. Thank you very much. As I said, it is a big question, and hopefully through the Senate inquiry, something else comes out from that. Someone's asking, thanks for bringing CLF to Australia. What are some of the future topics for webinars? We'll be interviewing people from AFL, from NRL. We'll hopefully get some families in as well to share some of their experiences, as well as women in sport. So we'll hopefully have that set up, and we'll send out an email with those coming up. Next question, is there much research into who might be more likely to be impacted by head knocks or concussion? For example, if people have existing medical conditions. Interesting question. Over to the panel.
There is some evidence to suggest that you know, people with ADD, ADHD could be more susceptible, you know, on the field with concussion. We're still trying to understand the issue about males and females. There's a lot of discussion at the moment about females being more at risk of concussions, having worse symptom reporting, taking longer to recover. A lot of that research, though, is based upon self-report. There is research coming through, obviously, now looking at, you know, biomarkers and things like that, but the majority of research that's informed us to date has been around symptom reporting. And I've done a couple of research studies, one back in looking at exercise science students, you know, at all levels of sport, you know, people who play recreation right through to professional athletes in 2015. And we found that males were less likely or had a worse attitude to concussions, and they were more likely to lie about their symptoms and play through their symptoms and not do proper rehab than females. So we saw a real disparity between the attitudes between males and females. We repeated the study back in 2019, and we found that the gap had closed a lot because of a greater awareness being talked about, but there was still a disparity there, that males were less likely to report their symptoms and you know, play through, not be seen as weak. So we do have a bit of work in that space, but that's just very quickly a couple of at-risk groups.
Great, thank you very much. Look, I think we've come to our last question. I know there are more questions in there, and hopefully Samantha's been able to type answers, but we'll have a look at them as well and get back an answer or a response to you in relation to the ones that we haven't been able to answer. Thank you, Mark, for your message in the chat as well. Again, please reach out to us. You can go through the CLF Australia website. There's a place that you can put in your message, or you can email us there. But our final question comes from Bill Richards. Hi, Bill, how are you? I hope you're well. He wants to know what arrangements are being made to provide advice and guidance for families who are having to look after former players. Really important question. Anyone?
Sorry, Annitta, I thought you were answering that. I think that's
Okay.
a great question for you to answer.
All right, no problem. So basically, that's what part of CLF Australia's role is to actually find ways to support these groups. So we are actually hoping to run a support group through CLF Australia. Perhaps we could run some webinars or some face-to-face events where families can get together and share, talk, perhaps look at resources together and so on. So that's really very much part of our agenda for CLF Australia. We really want to find a way to do that. Also, we are trying to raise money, and we're having a few events where we can raise money for the Australia CLF helpline, another area where we can actually assist families and those that are living with people who have suspected CTE or brain injuries, where we can find ways to actually link up, share resources, refer to relevant practitioners, as well as have events for the community together. So that hopefully that will answer that question there. All right, guys, I guess that's the end of our Q&A, and we've come to the end of the webinar. Thank you so much, Alan, Jamie, and Michael, for coming along this evening to conduct this webinar. I think it's been great to have you all, and thank you to everyone else as well who's come along to listen. If you do know someone who is struggling with CTE or suspected CTE or other symptoms, there is a CLF helpline that you can reach out to, and someone can sort of give you some direction there. We're also offering new support, as I mentioned before, that we're going to be running some Zoom meetings for caregivers. So that's something that's coming up. We have a few other events coming up. We have some more CLF walks to the games happening in June, as well as a couple of corporate functions happening as well. So we will keep you informed through email. So if you're not part of our email list, please make sure that you are. Finally, the foundation cannot put on events like this without the support through, through people who are able to donate. So if any of this is something that is of interest to you, we would love for you to donate if you can, and all of it will go towards the things that we've spoken about tonight, the research, the support, and the education and raising awareness. So I'd just like to say thank you again, and I wish everyone to have a wonderful evening, and look forward to seeing you again in our next webinar. So look out on your emails. Thank you very much.
Just before you go, Annitta, I think
Yes.
we need to also acknowledge the work that you've done with CLF to date. It's been absolutely fantastic bringing this all together, bringing the openings in Melbourne and Sydney, the charity walks, getting the webinars up. I think we certainly need to give you lots and lots of credit and kudos for doing all this on top of your own work as well. And also I think we'd like to give a bit of a shout out to Samantha Bureau, who's in the background there, for organising all the background work here too. So thanks to both of you, Annitta and Sam. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's great to be part of such a powerful organisation to make a difference and work with amazing people. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Annitta.
Thank you.